Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon for an incredible session with Fadah, Peter, and Mansir, who will be talking about how artificial intelligence can help us explore the more interactive and immersive way to say and to use data to provide journalism, even more insightful journalism. So the panel will take part with presentations from our guests, and please make sure to send your questions. We will have time at the end of the session for audience questions, so please make sure to send them throughout the conversation, and I'll make sure to note them down and ask them at the end. So we will be starting with Peter. Peter Andringa is a visual investigative journalist with the Financial Times. He's part of the award-winning visual investigation team, and he uses computational techniques alongside traditional journalism to craft data-rich visual stories. Over to you, Peter. Please share your screen and let's dive in.
That's great. Thanks, Sabrina. So as Sabrina mentioned, I'm Peter. I'm a data and visual journalist on the visual investigations team at the FT. The team has been around for about a year, and we use sort of open source and computational methods to find stories and then tell those stories in visual ways. So I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about one story that we've done that uses AI, but I think maybe it'll illustrate sort of the big picture approaches to how we think about AI in our work. So as I said, basically, we think of visual investigations as two things. It's a method of reporting using visual open source evidence, often big data sources, computational methods. And it's also a format of storytelling. It's a way of presenting the evidence to our readers in a way that we think helps build the case for our reporting and helps bring the reader along the reporting journey when they read the story. And when we think about AI, what AI means for our journalism, oftentimes the components of these stories are databases, satellite data, social media resources, public records. All of these are sort of big, messy data sources that I think there's a lot of opportunity for AI to help us process, search for, clean. But the underlying thread for all of our reporting is that it's human-led and AI-enabled. We see AI as one tool in our toolbox of reporting out these stories. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend our editor, Rula Khalaf, had written a letter laying out the FT's philosophy to using AI, which is fundamentally that journalists create, edit, report our stories, and we look for the best AI tools that will help us do that. But we think that the sort of human expertise is a core part of what we do. And so the two buckets of AI in our reporting and our visual investigations, we think of sort of AI discovery tools and AI measurement tools. Discovery tools are sort of like finding a needle in a haystack, where if you have a lot of data, AI can help you locate the most interesting, most relevant parts of that that you're looking for in a given story. And it can also be useful for measurement in sometimes more limited capacities to let us count the number of needles in a haystack with some level of precision. But one story we published about 6 months ago was an investigation into missing children from Ukraine who were abducted in sort of contested territories in eastern Ukraine and put up for adoption in Russia. And my colleague Allison Killing first sort of noted and spotted the opportunity for this story when she was looking at sort of two different databases of children who were missing in Ukraine. One was a Russian sort of state-affiliated adoption site that was run by a sort of NGO that was affiliated with the government and worked in a number of Russian states to list children that were available for adoption in those places. The other was a Ukrainian government site that was listing children who had been missing or abducted in the course of the war with the goal of trying to reunite them with their families. And so we saw these two databases and we thought, there's a hunch, is there any overlap between these two things and how could we work on figuring that out? There is a limited metadata, some first names, some last names, some dates of birth, some locations in both databases. But given the size and the messiness of the data, we were concerned that a sort of more traditional, either hand or computational method of joining these two different databases wasn't going to be enough. So first we had to sort of acquire the data. We scraped all of the listings that we could get from each database, and ended up basically with 41,000 Russian adoption bios and 4,000 Ukrainian children who were missing. And so comparing these side by side would be 182 million combinations, like far more than anyone could possibly look at on their own. And so this is where sort of we thought AI comes in, is this is a needle in a haystack scenario. We have a huge number of matches and we need to figure out how we can prioritize which ones are most important for us to dig farther into. So we built a facial recognition model in AWS that basically looked at the photos accompanying each of these listings and tried to find sort of matches that were likely to be similar based on facial features. Now, the model, the output of the model is not a binary match or no match. It's sort of a confidence score on how much the model thinks two photos are of the same person. And the model produced a huge number of matches that seemed like possible things worth considering. There were over 700 pairs with a 90% confidence. And as we looked at some of these by hand, we realized this wasn't an entirely reliable measure. Some of these actually were totally different children that just happened to have sort of similar facial features or like looked similar, but if you looked in detail at the age metadata or other details, it didn't seem to line up with sort of what was possible. And in some cases also, there were matches that were, between children of different age gaps or an old photo to a new photo where we actually weren't sure whether the algorithm was seeing something that we weren't or that it was correct or incorrect. It was messier than we thought to sort of interpret the outputs of this sort of AI use case. And so this is where sort of the human element of our reporting comes in. And as we think about, okay, if we have the outputs of this AI model, how do we verify? How do we check? How do we improve on what the model gives us? And this is a thing we had actually approached for a previous story we did a little bit before this on mosques in China, where we had looked at thousands of satellite images of mosques across the country and trying to identify visual and architectural changes that were an attempt to sort of de-Islamify the features of these mosques. And so to do this, we had built a tool to sort of manually let our reporters review thousands of these sites and look over time to say what changes happened to these buildings at different points in time. We had looked at using AI for this investigation, but in the end, the data size and the complexity of the sort of architectural changes meant that we wanted humans to look at all of them. But in this case, where we used AI, we realized we could also reuse this older tool we had built. And so we basically made a modified version of the same sort of data comparison tool that let us look at each possible match of two children and try to label them based on our own, basically, evaluation of the photos, of the metadata with the photos, of the additional information that we could combine from the biographies on each website. And so all the reporters sort of on this project ranked the matches based on what seemed to them likely or unlikely. And we went through a process of sort of reconciling all of the matches, but basically sitting in a big meeting room to decide which of these did we think were most deserving of additional reporting time. And in the end, we came up with 46 matches that we thought seemed similar enough that we should pass them along to authorities and work with our reporters on the ground in Ukraine to sort of pursue family members and follow-ups and trying to sort of actually identify and confirm these matches. Because in the end, even once we had 46 matches that we thought based on the data, we weren't going to report that number. That was not a confidence. That was just a possibility. And so that's where sort of the second stage of on the ground and human reporting comes in, is working with freelancers and our staff on the ground and government officials in Ukraine to get positive confirmation that the children in these two photos were actually of the same. And so again, like to go back to the haystack analogy, this process is narrowing from 180 million matches to about 1,000 that we looked through to about 46 for on the ground reporting. And in the end, there were 26 that the authorities and our reporters were able to confirm are matches. And some of these matches were cases where the names had been changed, the birthdays had been changed. Without a sort of algorithmic approach, we wouldn't have been able to join these listings from these different databases or identify these matches. But it's important to see that like AI is one part of this multi-step process, and a process that it would not have worked without that initial algorithmic step. But the AI was not nearly sufficient for us to get to the conclusions that we reached in the end of the story. And we're really happy that the story is having impact. There was a statement from the White House. Folks on the ground in Ukraine are actively working on reuniting some of these families and these children, and we hope to have updates on that as soon as we can. But ultimately, it illustrates the sort of importance and impact of taking a really big data set, taking algorithmic tools to expand the possibilities of what we're able to do on our own, and work very quickly, actually, in fast-moving scenarios. And so that's just one example, and I'm happy to talk about this more during the Q&A or answer any questions that folks have about it. But thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much for sharing the story and the case study of how you work together with your newsroom to bring it to publish. Next, we have Mansir Muhammed, who's geospatial intelligence specialist and data journalist with HumAngle Media in Nigeria. In 2024, he won the Sigma Award, and he's now also leading the AI implementation in the HumAngle newsroom. So, Mansir, over to you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Today I'll be presenting just a bit of what we do with AI in our interactive storytelling at HumAngle. So basically AI for us at interactive storytelling for us at HumAngle, it's basically just, well, the regular reporting. You use the regular standards of journalistic rigors to investigate newsworthy stories. And then what is different is the way we show it, the way we tell it, and the kind of components that we put together, which is what makes our interactive story different, and which is why it's complicated. Because unlike regular stories, you have you get the reporters to go to the field, you get news. If it's an open source story, if it's an open source intelligence story, you do the investigations, you put them together, and put the words, add your visualization, and you are done with it. But interactive stories, it's something we started a couple of years ago, and we wanted to do something that we not regularly put in our regular editorial news pieces, and so that's something that has heavy emphasis on designs, elements, and so because of this, it always involves a lot of technicalities and a lot of skilled team. And bringing people together to work on this thing is a big project, and you see a news report can go stale because of this. And so it's a very difficult task to get people working together, and which is something that which is my role basically at HumAngle. I get to be the nexus between these different teams, the technical teams, the IT teams. I understand a bit of code, so I know what they're up to, and the reporters, the ones on the field, every part of the team. So I have this skill, but even at that, I still have other assignments to do, and I cannot really do much of this thing on my own within very short, limited time. So here's where we've been using AI to help us streamline these processes. For instance, we've had trainings with legitimate, and I don't know if you know the organization, the trained journalists, and our use of AI. We've been having that over the past year. And so we've learned to curate data, to organize data, and I'm going to go into this in a bit. And visualization, interactive storytelling is not just copy and paste into a WordPress or a HTML page of a website. You have to have designs, complex designs, a lot of moving parts. People, data each displayed visualized in a very interesting way, and that takes a lot of coding, it takes a lot of technical abilities, and it's something we have to use AI to do, and we've been using AI to do recently, and I'm going to get into that in a bit. prototyping and design is one thing. I think it was an innovative thing we've used AI for. Like I said, a lot of these designs takes a lot of technical skills, and with AI, we can prototype it. And for my role here, when I make some prototype, I get to share it with my team. And what it does is that it serves as a baseline. We don't always use it, but it serves as a baseline for what we do, and it helps with our report. So this is, I started with this interactive report first because it's an interesting one. I didn't use AI for this at all, no part of it. But it was an interesting story because it's something that I thought in hindsight would have benefited from AI, because it took a lot of work to do. We had the reporter go to the field, and for months, the story was just sitting there while we work on these interactive elements. And what I did was, because the IT teams, like 3 members of the IT teams were busy at the point at that time, so there was no room for design. So what I had to do was try to code the skeleton of the system. It took a long time trying to put the pieces together, add this placeholder, put these elements, go to the designer, the illustrators, get these photos, and just put them together. But it didn't look anything like this. But this was what after we have done that, I took it to the IT team, and they were able to make it better, work on the interactions, and make it look okay. But it took a long time. So this next story, this one was the story I did after I discovered, well, to use AI, especially generative AI. For instance, in the process of the data collection, I had to take, I spent months, 3 to 4 months, taking screenshots of Google foot traffic data, popular times on Google Maps, and taking time because we're trying to visualize foot traffic for stay out of borders. And that took a lot of time, just translating those charts into the numerical data that we can plot into this example. You see here the map of the foot traffic. And what I did was I used a formula, I coded in formulas for how to condense daily records of this data, because we took hourly, morning, afternoon, evening, I had to take screenshots. This is a lot of data for 4 months. And what we did after doing this, that was already a lot of work. I didn't know about OCR at the time, but I would have attempted to use that to at least try to extract information from pictures. But after that, it took about 2 months to do that. After that, I just needed to use a few coding formulas from Microsoft Excel, and it condensed this daily data into weekly, which we were able to use to illustrate weekly foot traffic. In the background here, you will see the image. The image here in the background is something I generated using Gemini AI. It was a background thing. I didn't generate it for this project inside. I generated it as a prototype. I just did something so that I will send to the illustrator as a baseline for his concept, and it ended up matching. The featured image here, the cover image here showing this close sign, was something he did from a prototype I did. So one major thing I do with AI is design prototype to give people, to eliminate that meeting times, confusions, disunity. Once you coded a skeleton for the IT team, they know how to develop the website from there. Once you sketch a prototype for a design or even a visualization, data visualization, like this chart where originally from data visualization, there's not enough space to put that, but we have it on our website. It was original for data visualization, but I coded that we eventually sent it to the design team, and they expanded on it. I saved a lot of time in that, which is why I showed that in the first clip, because it was something I thought we would have benefited, would have cut down a lot of time for. This story here started fresh. I'd already gotten my foot on the AI. I'm very comfortable with using AI for prototype. I designed the entire skeleton of this website itself, and within a few weeks, I was able to do this, and I sent it to the IT team, got the stories, put the stories all together, put the audio together. I had a bit of coding, but not enough to do so much complex work, and not enough to invest time in, even if it's just for the prototype or the skeleton. And so it helps. This story was one of the fastest we did, because all these elements were together, and I was able to use this, streamline the process enough for the teams to work in unity and work very fast. So because of this, we have a lot of we've started exploring the AI. At first, we were like most newsrooms in the world, very apprehensive, very not apprehensive per se, but very careful about our approach to using AI in the newsroom. And so, for instance, we report on conflict and people affected by conflict. So things like using photorealistic images that look like people that can be mistaken for people. We have that in our AI policy. And attribution, and we're always training because it's a new frontier and we're developing our teams to learn. Our training has been going on for the past year and we still have more training. The last one we did was on video generation. They taught us on that, and I'm also actually exploring for my next project, which is something to just add a little bit of clip to, it just helps with the imagination. It helps everyone with the imagination. And we have been updating our interactive storytelling guide as we go on, trying to incorporate the technology as it develops and try to find our way niche in the AI industry development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mansir, for your insights. Next up, we have Fadah. Fadah Jassem is the head of data visualization at the National News in Abu Dhabi. She's a data and information integrity expert with years of experience across newsrooms and tech company. And she will today share with us her presentation shortly. I just want to remind everyone following us that you can type in your questions in the Q&A chat box. After this presentation, we'll dive in with the discussion and we'll answer all your questions. So thank you, Fadah. Over to you.
Thank you, Sabrina. Hello, everyone. Hi from Abu Dhabi, a very dark but quite balmy Abu Dhabi still here in the UAE. I hope you can all see my screen. Great. Well, thank you for that. I'm going to dive right in. There were some really great examples there from both Peter and Mansir, and I think today what I'm going to do is I'll probably focus more on what it's like to set up not only a data visualization team, but start thinking about how to incorporate AI into a new team that is what we're doing here at the National as well. So as Sabrina mentioned, I'm here at the National News. I've been here for 6 months. And I joined to set up their first data visualization team or unit. And I'm in the process of hiring and assembling a team. So I've been thinking a lot about kind of, what are the skills we need on the team? Who are the sorts of people we need on the team? And also how that can fit in with developing and thinking about a sort of AI-driven strategy as well for our visual investigations and data visualization team. And a lot of that has been based around, and again, it goes back to my time in tech, thinking about ways to scale and experiment very fast as well. So keep experimenting and scaling up on some of the work. So I want to quickly start by just like providing a bit of an overview or reminder, what's the purpose of data viz? What's the purpose of, visual storytelling? And a big part of it is capturing the audience, right? And it's providing news in a new and fresh kind of way that keeps the audience engaged longer. It's also about simplifying very complex stories and allowing, very complicated types of data to be understood in a visual form. And it's about making it accessible as well. So a part of that is enhancing the way we do storytelling and making sure that's impactful for our readers. And obviously AI is doing this at a faster rate. And the really nice thing, and part of the reason why I particularly love visualizations in the news industry and working around investigative visuals is because quite often these are the teams at the forefront of this tech, and they're kind of using really interesting and innovative tech, trying to leverage a lot of that AI. So that's really exciting for me in terms of thinking about how we can leverage emerging tech in this way. Okay, let's go. Sorry. So let's start by talking about what what AI is and isn't. I really love this quote. I spotted it the other day. It was a quote by Phoebe Connolly at the Washington Post. And she basically says that, you know, like everything else, like in all circumstances, AI works as like a condiment, as salt. You know, it can be sweet, savory, or part of a marinade to finish off the dish. So again, we don't serve it, we don't provide, and again, it's very similar to what Peter was talking about and Mansir was talking about. There's a lot of human elements in the way we think about you know, provide the end product with AI in mind to our audiences as well. So it's about enhancing our storytelling thoughtfully, and maybe sharpening it some way and making it faster, but not necessarily relying on it as the first port of call. So what do you think about if you're starting from scratch in this area? So a big part of this for me, my mission here at the National News, is really threefold. I've been thinking a lot about how to democratize data across the newsroom, make it accessible for more people, make it more easy to analyze, and AI can help in this way. There are lots of tools out there that can really help with data analytics and various other things. So I'm thinking about ways that we can democratize data and make it more accessible across the newsroom. Secondly, I'm thinking a lot about how to enhance our visual storytelling. Again, our colleagues on this call, you know, gave brilliant examples of how they've already been able to do that using very innovative and thoughtful ways of combining sort of human-led storytelling by using machines to help speed up the process of data collection and data analysis as well. So AI-driven tools for graphics, charts, and mappings can really help bring stories to life, I think, faster. And thirdly, of course, something that we all should be doing all the time is think about how we can introduce AI responsibly in the newsrooms and ensure that there's that human oversight there, and thinking about all the things that go with that. But of course, we know we come up with roadblocks, particularly in some of these new and emerging sort of techs as well. So we have people, well, what if I mess it up? What if I don't trust the AI? You know, I don't have access to the data. These are all really valid challenges, and they're things that we sort of have to come across together. So I'm trying to overcome this together. Again, with our newsroom, and collaborating with the right people and the right tools to sort of figure out these obstacles as well. Again, going back to democratizing data, the big part of that is empowering our teams. So I'm working on ways on upskilling, empowering our colleagues, and making sure that we find those super users in the newsroom that can help us sort of learn as we're going along, and make sure that we're experimenting and scaling when we can. Then I've started thinking about tooling, and a big part of that is understanding what we currently have, and also looking at tools that people don't realize actually have AI within them. So things like Flourish, things like Canva, you know, where we've been using AI-powered sort of plugins and parts of those already within the news gathering process. So thinking about that, and then thinking about, when I'm building out the team, the kind of broad sets of skills and knowledge that I might need when it comes to wanting to work more in this area. But then again, why AI? Why do we need it? I mean, again, both Peter and Mansir here gave excellent examples of brilliant visual storytelling and visual stories, investigative stories that they did without the use of AI. So why do we need it? Why can't we carry on as we've been? And I think a big part of that is to do with this, right? That we're generating and consuming data today at an astonishing rate, and that's only going to rise. That's, you know, on this upward sort of rocket trajectory, which means that, you know, we're going to some incredible amounts of data that we're producing globally as humankind, and we're just not able to analyze that all. Like, it's beyond human capacity, it's beyond human capability. So really, we do need machines to help us, you know, against the data that we're all producing at quite an astonishing rate. Right, sorry, I've missed my slide here. Okay, here we go. Yeah, and again, this is going back to the fact that, you know, we have limits to our human cognition in this area. I asked a ChatGPT if it thought the human mind was equipped to deal with so much data globally, and its response was that we're not inherently equipped, right? So we have our limits, and I think again, it's not just AI that's telling us this. It's not just ChatGPT, but, you know, there have been studies. This most recent study from the AI Index report from Stanford University shows that in its current form today and its in current power, AI is outperforming and beating a lot of human performance in some particular tasks, but particularly, which is really interesting for us, tasks that require visual analysis and visual reasoning. So things like image classification, things like visual reasoning. These are all things that, you know, already AI is surpassing us at the basic level. So where does this leave us journalists? You know, we give all the hard work to AI to do. What are we going to do with all that time? So in theory, and I say in theory for a reason, because, you know, really journalists never really have time. We always find ways to make ourselves busier and busier. But in theory, AI should be able to free up more time for us for more journalistic creativity, to create more opportunities to enhance immersive storytelling. And I think this is a really interesting area. And I think it's a trend that already we've been seeing. When I look at some of the major publications globally, you can just see how complex and creative a lot of these visual stories are becoming. And again, you know, that is part of that is quite often to do with the amount of time we're spending analyzing data and automating already some tasks that, you know, could have required very heavy lifting in the past. So again, less analysis in practice and more visual creativity for that too. So, and again, in time, what does that mean? Like, we can do more personalized type of visualizations for audiences. We can get more complex ideas across. We can ask, you know, and ask prompts to help us think of more creative ways to tell these stories. And again, it's just providing a better way for audiences to engage emotionally with some of this work. All of this being said, again, you know, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but again, it's we have to be more vigilant during that whole process, right? If we're handing off a lot of this big chunk of work to the machines, and again, you know, back to Peter's example on identifying Ukrainian children, you know, again, that you still need that human intervention. And it was a really great example, and one that reminded me of a similar project that I'd done back in a data miner many years ago, when we did an image classification model for weaponry as well. And again, it was the same sort of process where we had to manually go through lots of thousands of rows of data there as well to make sure that was accurate, and we couldn't quite leave it up to the machine, but, you know, it did help. So again, applications for us in visual investigations, in data investigations, a lot of it, I think, is about combining these raw data that we get and allowing and thinking about ways that audiences can see this in the best possible light, right? That feels both approachable, that feels authoritative. These are recent examples of stories that we've done. These were done manually because we're not quite set up yet on working on some of these projects, but something that maybe took us 3 months when we were working through analyzing all the invasion routes in Lebanon and thinking about all the evacuation or eviction zones in Gaza. You know, we could have actually put that through automation as well, and it would have sped up that time. Mapping is a big one. So I'm going to quickly jump into mapping because I think this is a really interesting one in terms of the geospatial area and how AI can really speed up. And again, this goes back to that chart that we showed, you know, showing just how much better actually and how it's overcome human ability to understand patterns in visuals and in visual analysis. AI is at the moment. So one of the things that it's really good at doing, again, and you know, maybe in some ways not as good at doing, but at scale, AI is really good at AI models can process vast geospatial data sets, you know, that, you know, would take days, hours, months, you know, for humans. You can just jump, you know, pop that in and say, you know, these are the patterns I'm looking for. These are the areas that I want to see. What are you seeing? So again, that's a really interesting one, particularly for conflict zones, humanitarian crises, environmental changes, you know, things like that. This is a really good opportunity. And actually, we've seen a trend where there have been a lot more environmental science type papers that have actually led into sort of some of this conflict reporting as well, because they use the same methodologies and the same models in environmental sciences to kind of help out with some of the big conflict reporting that we've seen recently. The other one is AI potentially also helps us layer. And again, some of my colleagues have talked about this and discussed ways that this they've used this technique as well. So, you know, using multiple layers of data to kind of visualize it in one way as well. That's a really interesting way to do it. Also thinking about live conflicts, data or live data in general, weather data, thinking how we can combine that with more historical maps or anything else. So again, there are some really good tools for doing that. Number 3 is extracting that data. So automating data extraction is a very, very useful tool to have on hand, right? And again, it's all about the sort of prompting, it's all about the data that you provide it. But again, there's a lot of opportunity here to think about the best ways to look at different layers of mapping and think about ways that you want to extract various types of points and text from various images as well. And number 4 is enhancing. Again, I think we've gone through this already, but I think this is a really interesting area and one that will probably need to be explored a lot further as well. You know, thinking about ways that in the future AI can help us a lot more with 3D imagery and creating kind of reconstructions of scenes and things like that. I think will really be interesting as well. Taking a flat image and making that 3D is something that could potentially work really well. And again, just exploring big data that goes in with the maps or without the maps, you know, thinking about ways to identify and power and drive a lot of the AI technology through enhanced searching, using deep web, through link analysis, thinking about ways that, you know, vast numbers of social networks react with each other. You know, there's some great tools out there already for this, but again, AI could just take that to a next level and, you know, using some simple prompts, we can get there and think about ways that we can do that at a more bigger scale as well. And then finally, I just want to talk quickly about, I wanted to provide some examples here about ways potentially that you could prompt GPTs to think about your final design, right? And think about ways that, you know, in an ideal world, you know, we would all get to a place where we have our, you know, own GPT prompted design kind of unit where we can say, look, you know, this is a map I have, or this is an image, and I want to overlay it with our brand colors, or I want to make sure that, you know, we kind of add the right text and annotations in our style, for example. So again, these are just some examples of ways that we can maybe think about or get to using or leveraging design and graphic design, motion graphics techniques using AI as well in this area. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fadah, for your wonderful presentation. We're gonna head into the Q&A, and we have a lot of questions from our audience, so I'll try to combine them to make the best use of the last 5 minutes we have together. I think one of the many questions I see here is sort of how do you manage and what are the challenges of this hybrid process? So when it comes to keeping the human in the loop, some of our attendees have asked if there is lack of AI literacy within the newsrooms. Can journalists get things wrong? What are the challenges that you face in your cases? Maybe we can start with you, Peter.
Yeah, I'll just address a brief part of that question, I think, which is the challenges of the human in the loop piece, and I see another question here, which is how long did it take? And the answer is the AI and the data part doesn't take very long. It's the human part that takes a while, but we're okay with that, right? I think we probably did most of the sort of modeling and data work for the story in a week or two, but it took months of on the ground reporting and working with authorities and trying to identify families before we had confidence that we could sort of report some of these results. And the other challenge is thinking very, very carefully through both the biases and potential risks, right? So as Fadah mentioned really well, thinking about what happens if you get the two types of errors for an AI model are a false positive or a false negative. And so to think about each of those is what happens if the AI labels something as positive when it should be negative, or negative when it should be positive. And if you think about both of those errors, different things that can happen. For us, it was, what's the risk of misidentifying a child as a match when they were not? It's a little bit of wasted reporting resource, but not a huge deal. On the flip side, the risk of missing a potential match who is in fact the same child is a pretty serious risk. And so we thought carefully about how to mitigate each of those risks by integrating human review. And then also data protection, I think we haven't talked about much, but I think especially in investigations, if you have sensitive data, if you have sources, in our case, we had images of children which were available on the public web, but we still treated it as very sensitive data. That's why I blurred them all out in my presentation. And so we thought very carefully and spent a lot of time going through contracts, working with lawyers, ensuring that any models that we built or used had the data protection guarantees that we needed before we could use any remotely sensitive data in them.
But I don't know if you want to jump in and answer my previous question. And in the meantime, I also just want to add a lot of the attendees of today's panel are asking for tips for specific tools and resources that you might be able to share.
Yeah, thanks, Sabrina. Yeah, so I think I'll start with that bit about what are the risks and how we can sort of help train more journalists in this way. I'll be very honest, I think it takes time. You have to be ready to give it time, right? And it's only it's such a huge thing, and it's a big culture shift for many people in many newsrooms as well. We often come to these kind of conferences or these kind of seminars, and everyone seems enthusiastic about AI and about all this new emerging tech, but actually there are a lot of people who still potentially not very sure, or they haven't explored it as much. So again, it's about, and I truly believe it's about bringing as many people along as you can as well. So we've been doing things, like I said, a big part of it is starting with democratizing data, demystifying what data analysis is and how you can access data is a big one as well. So it's thinking about ways to do that. We've been doing that by providing some trainings. We have another one coming up next week. I've done some presentations as well with various members in our newsroom as well, just to get them to think about that and get them more comfortable with it. Once you're there, then you start thinking about sort of the other steps of kind of, introducing more of that. But I think a big part of it also is again, just finding those super users and working together to kind of, especially if you're a smaller newsroom, I think it's different in bigger news organizations that have all these specialized units set up for this. You have to work small, and you have to experiment at a small scale, and don't be afraid to sort of fail and try again. So I think that's the kind of way to approach it. Is that part of the question? Yeah.
I think
Yeah, great. In terms of tools, I think it's very difficult. There's not one particular tool that stands out, and there are different tools that can do different things. Now, a lot of these sort of geospatial satellite analysis or even kind of design tools out there, whether from Adobe to others, all have AI plugins, and they all have, you know, AI generated options within them. So I think about ways that you can utilize them and think about whether it works for you or not, because sometimes, you know, just because something has AI on the label doesn't necessarily mean it's going to do a better job and it's going to work for you. So I think Mansir, he gave some great examples of when it did work and when it didn't work as well for him. So maybe Mansir, you have some insight on that as well.
So I mean, we know that journalism is a human endeavor first. Even we don't know where AI is going to take us, but for right now we know it's human first, then AI second. But it's like we've learned from our training, it's important to always experiment. A lot of the things we do, we experiment. Even finding the tools, we can prompt this, especially these generative chatbots, to help us find some tools, suggest tools that we can explore later and see where it takes us. And from during this experimentation, we get to know the boundaries and possibilities. As much as sometimes we like to adhere to the strong principles of traditional journalism, a little bit of innovation requires a little bit of experimentation, which is what I've been doing, and I think this is what everybody is doing, even in this on this call. And I think we should just keep an open mind, just like every other tool. Like a lot of hosting tools that I use, were born from experimentation and testing the boundaries, testing the limits, and the possibility comes later, and also the limitations and the boundaries you set.
Thank you so much, Mansir. Thank you, Fadah, and thank you, Peter. I think unfortunately we'll have to wrap up the session here. I'm sure that we will make available all of the resources shared. We have our case study database at Journalism AI. And I just want to thank everyone for following this panel discussion.